afternoon, I'm Nadia Jani and you're watching A News. Let's see your headlines. Canada follows the UK with a plan to recognise a Palestinian state. Donald Trump announces trade deal with South Korea and 50% tariffs on Brazil. A Syrian-Israeli ministerial meeting is set to take place in Baku today. Canada will recognise the state of Palestine following similar moves by UK and France. The decision hinges on Palestinian reforms and has drawn criticism from Israel, calling it a reward to Hamas.
Canada will recognise a Palestinian state at the United Nations General Assembly this September, joining the UK and France in a coordinated diplomatic shift. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says the move hinges on Palestinian Authority reforms, including elections that exclude Hamas.
For these reasons, Canada intends to recognise the State of Palestine during the session of the United Nations General Assembly in September 2025. This intention is based on the willingness of the Palestinian Authority to undertake essential reforms, including the promise by its president, Mahmoud Abbas, to hold general elections in 2026 and not to militarize the Palestinian state.
This comes after UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer confirmed plans to recognise Palestine unless Israel agrees to a ceasefire and a lasting peace agreement.
So today, as part of this process towards peace, I can confirm the UK will recognise the State of Palestine by the United Nations General Assembly in September, unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza, agree to a ceasefire, and commit to a long-term sustainable peace, reviving the prospect of a two-state solution.
This move comes after French President Macron became the first G7 leader last week to publicly endorse recognising Palestine on the platform X. Israel has condemned the recognition plans, calling them a reward to Hamas. Critics argue that recognition now risks undermining efforts to reach a ceasefire and could further inflame tensions in the region. However, supporters say it reflects frustration with stalled peace talks and the worsening humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the West Bank. If the UK and France proceed, the US would be the only permanent UN Security Council member not recognising a Palestinian state. The diplomatic shift signals a growing frustration within Western capitals over the long-running Israeli-Palestinian conflict and raises questions about how this will affect future peace negotiations.
A joint humanitarian effort by Jordan and the UAE have seen airdrops over Gaza continue. But while aid trickles in, critics say it's far from enough to meet the desperate needs on the ground, and pressure is mounting across the Arab world.
Airdrops over Gaza continued its joint Gallant Night 3 operation. 2 cargo planes, 1 Jordanian, 1 Emirati, delivered around 15 tons of humanitarian aid, including food and medical supplies. The deliveries come after growing criticism on social media, where many across the Arab world have questioned the limited regional response to Gaza's deepening humanitarian crisis. Not only Jordan, but Egypt has also joined in sending humanitarian aid by air to the Strip. According to Egyptian military officials, 4 transport planes departed with supplies to ease severe shortages amid restricted ground access. The total aid dropped in recent days now totals around 73 tons. This comes after Israel announced limited permission for aid delivery and paused military operations in some areas. However, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency criticised the move, saying they fall far short of addressing the worsening famine situation. The World Food Programme also says airdrops alone cannot meet the needs of the 2 million people living in Gaza. As food stocks ran out, the World Health Organization is warning of mass starvation. The Gaza Health Ministry says 154 people, including 89 children, have died of malnutrition, most in recent weeks. A global hunger monitor said on Tuesday that a famine scenario is unfolding. Israel says it has no aim to starve Gaza.
The US has announced its most significant Iran-related sanctions since 2018. It targets more than 115 individuals, entities and vessels tied to Tehran's global oil shipping network. Tehran condemns the move as a direct attack on its economy.
The US Treasury Department on Wednesday unveiled a major wave of sanctions targeting over 115 Iran-linked individuals, entities and vessels in what officials call the most significant Iran-related sanctions action since 2018. The move intensifies the Trump administration's maximum pressure campaign, following last month's bombing of key Iranian nuclear sites. At the center of the sanctions is Mohammad Hossein Shamkhani, son of senior Supreme Leader Advisor Ali Shamkhani. According to Treasury, Shamkhani operates a vast global shipping network through intermediaries that facilitate the sale of Iranian and Russian oil, generating tens of billions of dollars in illicit revenue to support Tehran. The sanctions affect 15 shipping companies, 52 vessels, 12 individuals, and 53 entities across 17 countries, including Panama and Italy. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson condemned the sanctions as a hostile US act, calling them an evil attempt to undermine Iran's economy and public welfare. The EU had also sanctioned Shamkhani earlier this month over ties to the Russian oil trade. While the US insists the move is Iran-focused, officials acknowledged the action will impact Russia as well. The announcement comes amid dim prospects for renewed US-Iran diplomacy following recent military escalations.
South Korea has reached a last-minute trade deal with the US, locking in a 15% tariff rate on its exports. The agreement includes major Korean investments in US industries.
South Korea has sealed a last-minute trade deal with the US, avoiding steep new tariffs that were set to hit its exports from August 1st. The agreement sets a 15% tariff rate on South Korean imports, lower than the threatened 25%, and includes a $350 billion Korean investment in the US economy.
The most remarkable point in this agreement is the expansion of cooperation with the United States in the shipbuilding sector. The South Korea and US Shipbuilding Fund of $150 billion will encompass the entire shipbuilding ecosystem, including ship construction, MRO, and equipment. It will be invested in specific projects based on the needs of our country's companies.
Seoul will also buy $100 billion worth of US energy and open more broadly to American goods, but it held firm on beef and rice. Washington had pushed to ease import limits and lift age restrictions on US beef, but South Korea refused, citing food security and domestic backlash. Farmers had threatened mass protests if protections were weakened. While the deal avoided that flashpoint, not all sectors were spared. Steel and aluminum exports from South Korea will still be hit with a 50% tariff under Trump's global tariff rules. Market reaction was mixed. The Kospi rose nearly 1% as investors welcomed a deal that avoided worse penalties, but major automakers took a hit. Hyundai and Kia shares dropped 2% and 3.3% respectively. Meanwhile, Trump also announced fresh trade deals with Cambodia and Thailand, part of a broader tariff push ahead of his August 1st deadline.
The economic fallout is escalating between Brazil and the US President Donald Trump, who has slapped steep tariffs on Brazilian imports, triggering a strong response from Brasilia. Oil exports are temporarily suspended and emergency measures are underway. The trade dispute is becoming quickly a geopolitical breaking point.
US President Donald Trump has signed an executive order increasing tariffs on most Brazilian imports to 50%, up from the previous 10%. The White House says the move is in response to Brazil's alleged suppression of free speech and judicial actions against former President Jair Bolsonaro. In response, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has pledged to invoke Brazil's economic reciprocity law, asserting that if the US charges Brazil 50%, Brazil will charge US 50%. The President also called an emergency cabinet meeting to design a coordinated response strategy, even as diplomatic channels remain open. However, the tax hikes exclude oil. The US is Brazil's top export. It's after Petrobras, Shell, Total Energies, ExxonMobil, and Equinor all suspended shipments to America for most of July ahead of the 1st of August deadline. However, deadline has since moved to the 6th of August. Shipments have now resumed. Still, the disruption underscored how ambiguity in trade policy can ripple across supply chains.
Uma metralhadora tarifária giratória.
Trump launches a rotating tariff machine gun indiscriminately, and without good reasoning, this creates great insecurity for all companies and sectors that have commercial relations with the United States, so they are forced to seek new markets to diversify. So this instability imposed by the Trump administration on international trade creates this insecurity and will inevitably force countries to diversify their trading partners. Naturally, the US is a formidable market, and no one wants to lose its market share, but this market needs to be relatively friendly.
Meanwhile, Brazil's government has voiced concern over the impact on vital export sectors, including coffee, beef, orange juice, and aircraft. Officials noted that Brazil supplies a third of all coffee consumed in the US. Speaking to CNN Brazil, Finance Minister Fernando Haddad said he aims to preserve business confidence despite the uncertainty. However, he added that the full extent of the US measures remains unclear. Haddad also noted an unexpected side effects, such as falling prices in Brazil's domestic food market.
I'm even noticing this. The reports I'm getting on price behavior over the last 2 weeks are precisely those that are being targeted by the tariffs, especially meat and fruit. There has been a perception that retail prices are now falling. We cannot be arrogant or submissive. We have to respect Brazil. Brazil has a good size. Every country deserves respect. But Brazil, because of its dimension, its importance in the world, and its historic multilateral diplomacy, I think we have all the conditions to prevent August 1st from being a fateful day. We will continue negotiating.
Alongside the tariff hike, Washington has also imposed visa restrictions and asset freezes on Brazilian Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes and several associates.
Pakistan says it also has reached a trade deal with the US just ahead of the 1st of August deadline. The confirmation comes after US President Donald Trump said that the two countries signed a deal to jointly develop Pakistan's oil reserves. Hira Mustafa has more.
Pakistan's finance ministry says the agreement includes a reduction in reciprocal tariffs with particular benefits for Pakistani exports. The exact scale of tariff relief has not been made public. Washington has also made no reference to tariffs being part of this deal, but officials in Islamabad claim the US has agreed to ease tariffs against Pakistan in a bid to strengthen ties. However, exact details of the trade deal will remain under wraps for now. Pakistan has rolled back a 5% duty imposed last month on American goods. The move, experts say, was aimed at securing tariff exemptions from the United States. Business leaders have been saying the country's struggling economy cannot bear increased trade costs. President Donald Trump announced the deal on social media platform X, describing it as a step towards deeper engagement with Islamabad aimed at unlocking its energy potential. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has also thanked President Trump for facilitating the deal. Earlier in April, Washington had announced a potential 29% tariff on Pakistani imports, but later suspended it for 90 days to facilitate trade talks. The US is Pakistan's largest export destination, particularly for textiles, which make up nearly 90% of all of Islamabad's exports. Officials believe the trade deal will boost bilateral trade. Pakistan's export more to the US than it imports from it, with a goods trade deficit standing at $3 billion in 2024. Analysts say the agreement is a positive step that could help revive the South Asian country's ailing economy. The announcement of this deal comes even as the US president says he's still negotiating a trade deal with Pakistan's neighbor and arch rival India. Hira Mustafa for A News in Islamabad.
President Donald Trump has threatened India with tariffs over Russia. He is putting pressure on India and accused them of buying military equipment from Russia and being the largest buyer of Russian energy. I'm now joined by Surajit Mazumdar, professor at the Center for Economic Studies and Planning from New Delhi, to delve into this tariff deal, but a lot more. Hello there.
Hello. Thank you.
Thank you. My first question is, if the deal with the US fails, could India's economy move even closer to Russia?
Well, actually, it's not quite possible for the US and Russia to be considered as substitutes as far as India's economic relations are concerned. The United States is the single most important source of surplus foreign currency earnings for India, from its trade in goods, from trade in services, and also because of remittances from Indians who work in the US and send money back. India's trade with Russia is very different in nature. Historically, largely, it was related to the defense sector. And of late, after the Ukraine conflict, India has been buying oil from Russia. But other than that oil trade, there is very little trade between, and defense trade, there's very little trade between India and Russia. So I don't think that the two can be considered as substitutes for each other. And the difficulty that India faces is that India is a net oil importer, and therefore if Russian oil is available cheaper, then it is something that is to its advantage. But it also faces the threat that its single most important surplus foreign currency earning trade partner is the United States. And if it loses that, then also it has a problem. Because overall India's trade is also in deficit. So India faces a difficult choice as far as this is concerned.
Yes.
But as of now, it doesn't appear that India's exports to the US have been very seriously affected by the the Trump administration's measures. In fact, in the April-June quarter for 25, India's overall exports increased by just about 2%, but India's exports to the US have gone up by 22%.
Okay, well, it looks like obviously India is having to play a very tight game between obviously Russia and the US. But what are the consequences for the Indian economy if it does face high tariffs from US sanctions?
Well, it will face, in the short run, certainly difficulty. Though I think the United States also has a problem. It's not easy to replace the imports from other countries, including India, with imports from with domestic production. So, in the short run, there will be some kind of disruptive effects. But India will have to think about long-term what are its options that are available to it, given the fact that the United States is, of course, a very important trading partner for India, and India doesn't want to lose that. That's the situation for every country in the world. But if you lose in the process of trying to have a deal, the very advantages of that trade relation, then it's a very high price to pay. So India will have to think about how to balance these different considerations. So we'll have to see how the trade negotiations work out. But in the short run, if the tariffs do affect India's exports to the US, it has quite significant implications for India's economy.
Definitely. And how is the Indian government reacting to Trump's threats?
Well, that's not quite clear to the public at large, because if you look at the global reactions to Trump's tariff measures, the Indian government has been one of the most silent. It's never really said anything very strongly against the measures, and it's been trying to sort it out through negotiations. So it's not in the public domain exactly what's quite going on in the negotiations. But so far, the response of the Indian government has been quite muted.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining me, Surajit Mazumdar. Thank you.
Thank you.
A new EU-US trade deal has been agreed, significantly shifting transatlantic relations, hailed by Washington as a generational modernization. The agreement reshapes energy, trade, tariffs and investment, though it faces mixed reactions in Europe.
I'm going to let you say, but I think it's the biggest deal ever made. Thank you very much.
A new landmark trade deal between the United States and the European Union seeks to fundamentally rebalance their economic relationship. Energy security is a core focus. The US is already a dominant EU energy partner, supplying 55% of LNG in 2025 and 17% of oil in 2024, alongside 700 million euros in nuclear fuel and services by 2024. Under the agreement, the European Union is now committing to purchase $750 billion in US energy and make new investments of $600 billion in the United States, all by 2028. For most EU exports to the US, including cars, pharmaceuticals, and semiconductors, will be at a new 15% tariff. This rate is notably lower than President Donald Trump's previously threatened 30%. However, steel, aluminium, and copper exports will continue to face a 50% US tariff. Meanwhile, the European Commission anticipates that established quotas will eventually reduce this effective rate, and the US government expects to generate tens of billions in annual revenue. Conversely, the EU has committed to imposing 0% tariffs on US goods, aiming to eliminate existing sectoral duties, such as the 10% tariff previously applied to car imports. The White House highlights this as providing unprecedented market access for American producers seeking to expand into the European market. The deal also aims to reduce Europe's reliance on Russian fuel. In 2024, the EU still imported about 22 billion euros of fossil fuels from Russia and about 700 million euros worth of nuclear supplies. Despite the administration's optimistic framing, reaction in Europe has been far more critical. French Prime Minister François Bayrou labelled the agreement a dark day for the bloc, warning it risks hollowing out European industry and weakening economic sovereignty. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz echoed these concerns, stating the deal will cause considerable damage to European exporters and undermine the European Union's competitiveness in the global economy. Beyond these direct tariff impacts, the deal has broader implications for global energy supply chains and geopolitical alliances. According to the experts, the deal may bolster trade along the Middle Corridor, a vital land and sea route connecting Europe to Central Asia. Increased US and EU cooperation in industrial goods and logistics could boost transit traffic through these countries, potentially helping to offset some of the trade imbalances created by the new tariff structure.
The Ukraine's defense ties with the US are deepening as President Volodymyr Zelensky signs off on key principles for a large-scale weapons agreement. The announcement coincided with the plans for a bilateral drone production deal and renewed warnings to Russia following a deadly wave of airstrikes across Ukraine.
We had a deal about 4 times.
Key principles for large-scale weapons agreements between Ukraine and the United States have been approved by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The announcement was made by Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko, who said they were preparing to sign a drone deal focused on the production and sale of unmanned aerial vehicles. President Zelensky says the deal is huge.
Today I also approved the key principles of our agreements with the United States, Ukraine-US agreements on arms. These are large-scale agreements. I spoke about them with President Trump, and I very much hope we will be able to implement all of it. This will definitely strengthen both our countries and, by extension, our allies and partners.
The deal came after Russian airstrikes on a hospital and a prison killed at least 19 people in southeastern Ukraine on Tuesday. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump says he will start imposing punitive measures on Russia within 10 days if Moscow showed no progress toward ending its war in Ukraine. Additionally, Zelensky says Kyiv is preparing new conversations and new meetings with partners at different levels.
We highly value America's principled actions in pressuring Russia for the sake of peace. It is precisely now that action is needed to force Russia toward peace. Yes, Moscow wants to keep fighting, but the whole issue lies in potential, in resources for the war, in money. That is why sanctions are useful. That is why pressure can work. We are also preparing new conversations and new meetings with our partners at different levels. The goal is one, to strengthen the position of Ukraine and all those who seek peace.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has until the 8th of August to agree on a ceasefire after Trump moved the earlier September deadline. If it's not agreed by then, President Trump says he'll impose punitive sanctions and tariffs. Meanwhile, 6 people have been killed Thursday morning, including a 6-year-old boy after Kyiv was hit with missiles and drones overnight. Authorities say at least 52 people were also injured when a 9-story building collapsed from the bombardments. Around 27 locations in the capital city were struck, according to officials.
The US and Turkey are moving closer to resolving their long-running dispute over the Russian-made S-400 missile system. US Ambassador to Ankara Tom Barak told Turkish media that a path will be found to resolve key defense disputes. He said the 2017 disagreement stemmed from a misunderstanding and noted shifting conditions. Barak also expressed hope for progress on F-35 and F-16 issues as both nations aim to deepen trade ties, and NATO looks increasingly to Turkey for support. A ministerial meeting between Israel and Syria is set to take place in Baku. According to AFP, the talks will focus on security situation in southern Syria.
A high-level meeting between Syrian and Israeli officials is scheduled for Thursday in Baku, Azerbaijan. AFP cites a diplomat saying Syrian Foreign Minister Assad al-Shaibani and Israel's Minister of Strategic Affairs Ron Dermer will attend the talks. This follows a similar meeting in Paris last week. The focus will be on southern Syria, particularly the aftermath of deadly clashes in the Sweda region. This isn't the first time Baku has hosted discreet negotiations. The Azerbaijani capital has hosted at least 3 rounds of dialogue between Israel and Turkey over military activity in Syria. Earlier this month, Syrian President Ahmad al-Sharaa paid an official visit to Azerbaijan. During the trip, the two countries signed agreements on post-war reconstruction in Syria and energy exports, including a plan to deliver Azerbaijani gas to Syria via Turkey. According to a Syrian source cited by I-24 News, al-Sharaa also met with a high-level Israeli delegation in Baku. These talks highlight Azerbaijan's growing strategic location for hosting and facilitating discussions on conflicts in the Middle East.
Georgia has connected 5 solar power plants with a total capacity of 10 megawatts to its national grid, marking the first time solar energy has entered the country's transmission system. Supported by nearly $5 million in local bank funding, Georgia's economy ministry says this project is part of a broader renewable energy effort. Currently, 125 megawatts of wind power are under construction, with an additional 200 megawatts in development. The long-term goal is to strengthen energy security and enable electricity exports to Europe through a planned Black Sea cable. In a statement from prison, opposition leader Mamuka Kazaradzi has accused the Georgian government of sabotaging the Ankylia Deep Sea project. As new talks with a Chinese company move forward, the port's future now raises fresh questions about Georgia's geopolitical alignment.
From behind bars, the opposition leader Mamuka Kazaradze has accused the ruling Georgian Dream Party of what he called sabotaging the Ankylia Deep Sea Port project. In his statement, Khazardze claimed that the government deliberately obstructed a development vital for Georgia's national interests. He argued that the nuclear port could already be operational today, bringing thousands of jobs and turning Georgia into a regional transit hub if it had received Western backing from the very beginning. But for now, the current government is pursuing another options. Ties have reportedly been developing with Chinese communication construction company, or other CCCC. If the deal goes through, the Georgian government will own 51% of this project, while the CCCC will hold the remaining 49% and serve as the main contractor. The supporters of this potential deal argue that Chinese firms bring financing, speed, and experience, the factors that could finally launch construction after the years of delay. But critics warn that partnering with U.S. blacklisted company could strain Georgia's future relationship with Washington and pull the country farther from its declared Euro-Atlantic path. The nuclear deep-sea port was originally envisioned as a Western-oriented project with a high-capacity gateway between Europe and Asia, giving access to deep waters for large cargo ships. For now, with government's efforts and plans to select the investor still underway, the project's future hinges not only on contracts or logistics, but also on geopolitical direction Georgia chooses to take. It's Nini Nikolaishvili reporting from Tbilisi, A News.
That's all we have for now. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.